Good ball forward and Brazil's in a position he's not offside. Brazil scores. And Manchester United.
Hansen. Outside him is Souness. Still Hansen though.
Football, the beautiful game. For over a century it's been about passion, community and the pure joy of sport. But somewhere along the line something changed. Today when you watch the Premier League, you're not just watching football. You're watching one of the world's most sophisticated gambling advertisements. And you might not even realize it. Let's roll the clock back. The year 2002, Fulham Football Club becomes the first Premier League team to put a betting company on their shirts. Betfair paid them handsomely for the privilege. At the time it raised eyebrows, but it was just the beginning. Fast forward to today, and gambling companies aren't just on shirts. They're everywhere. Stadium names, advertising hoardings, social media. The transformation has been staggering. In fact, gambling sponsorship in the Premier League has grown by 1000% in just 22 years. But the real explosion came after 2005. That year the UK Gambling Act was passed, making it significantly easier for betting companies to advertise. The floodgates didn't just open, they were blown off the hinges. By 2016, nearly half of Premier League clubs had gambling sponsors on their shirts. By the 2024-25 season, that number hit a record high 11 clubs out of 20. That's 55% of the league, more than half. Let me spell that out. In the world's most watched football league, you've got Aston Villa with Betano, Brentford with Hollywood Bet, Crystal Palace with Net88, Everton with Stake, Fulham with Espotop, Leicester with BC Game, Nottingham Forest and Bournemouth also in the mix, West Ham with Betway, Wolves with DBet, Southampton switched sponsors but stayed with gambling companies. That's 11 teams, 11 massive walking advertisements for gambling, broadcast to billions of people worldwide. So why? Well, the answer is rather simple, I'm afraid. Money. Lots of it. West Ham's deal with Betway? Worth around £10 million per year. Aston Villa's partnership with Betano for the 2024-25 season could be worth up to £40 million. These aren't pocket change figures. For clubs outside the so-called Big Six, gambling sponsorships have become absolutely crucial revenue streams. This money funds player acquisitions, infrastructure projects, and keeps clubs competitive. Without it, many would struggle to keep the pace. The Premier League collectively earned an estimated £60 million from gambling shirt sponsors in the 2022-23 season alone. But here's the thing, this isn't just a British problem. This is global. The Premier League reaches an audience of over 3 billion in-home viewers across 225 territories. When a child in Lagos, Mumbai or Jakarta watches Mo Salah score a screamer, they're also seeing Betway's logo on their opposition shirt. They're absorbing the message that gambling and football go hand in hand. The global gambling and betting sponsorship market was valued at $1.7 billion in 2022. It's expected to reach $2.8 billion by 2029. And football? Football is the crown jewel. It dominates the sports segment, attracting more gambling sponsorships than any other sport. It's not just football, of course. Darts, rugby league, horse racing, cricket, mixed martial arts. In Australia, nearly every major sporting code has significant gambling partnerships. In America, the explosive legalization of sports betting has created a gold rush. Bet365, DraftKings, FanDuel, these names are now as synonymous with sport as Nike or Adidas once were. There was a time when watching sport meant watching sport. Now it means watching an extended advert for an industry that, for some, leads to devastating consequences. Now, what I've shown you so far, that's the legal, regulated side of the gambling industry. But there's another world, a shadowy underbelly where the rules don't apply and the damage is even worse. Meet OneXBet, a gambling operation that's been described by the Council of Europe as the Wagner Group of illegal betting. That's not hyperbole, that's an official comparison to Russian mercenaries. OneXBet is banned in the UK, US, France, Spain, Russia and dozens of other countries. In 2019, investigations linked them to a casino where cards were dealt by topless women, to advertising on illegal websites, and even making bets on children's sports. The UK gambling license was revoked. Russia issued international arrest warrants for their founders, and yet somehow they're bigger than ever. How? Because they simply don't care about the law. They operate through over 1,000 different websites and mirror domains. When one gets blocked, they create 10 more. They've sponsored FC Barcelona, one of the world's biggest football clubs. They've live-streamed amateur college football matches without permission and offered bets on 14-year-old children playing sport. In 2024, investigations by Bellingcat discovered that 1xBet was organizing thousands of live-stream amateur games with fake teams. Children as young as 14 were being used so people could place bets on them. Let that sink in. 14-year-olds being exploited for illegal gambling. And the money? It flows through cryptocurrency websites and offshore accounts. Investigators tracked over 3 million transactions worth 4 billion euros through just 250 of their crypto wallets. They operate from Curacao, a tiny island with virtually no gambling oversight. Their subsidiary was declared bankrupt, but they just kept operating. They owe millions to players they refuse to pay. It's organized crime dressed up as entertainment. But here's the really frightening part. Sites like 1xBet and many legitimate gambling companies share one glaring weakness. Their age verification is rubbish. This is what stands between a 14-year-old and a gambling site. A checkbox. That's it. In 2002, the Federal Trade Commission found that 1 in 5 gambling sites had no warnings to minors whatsoever. 23 years later, and the FBI confirmed that age verification software is still largely ineffective. Offshore sites often skip age verification entirely. They rely on what's called self-attestation, which is a fancy way of saying just tick the box and we'll believe you. No ID check, no document upload, no facial recognition, nothing. Research shows that platforms outside the US jurisdiction have weak identity verification systems or simply ignore them. A study found that children can access gambling sites by using fake dates of birth, stolen credit card details, or crypto wallets that avoid bank verification. And then there's the normalization. Sites like FlashScore, which millions of people use to check football scores, are absolutely plastered with gambling ads. FlashScore is owned by Live Sport Group, which openly describes betting companies as their frequent advertising partners. The sites generate revenue through display ads, sponsored content, and affiliate programs with gambling operators. Think about that for a moment. You're a 12-year-old kid who just wants to know if their team won. You open FlashScore and you immediately hit with odds, betting promotion, and links to gambling sites. The message is clear: sport and gambling are inseparable. Even when FlashScore offers a paid subscription to remove ads, betting content remains visible because, in their words, it brings value and a better experience to users. Translation: gambling companies pay too well for us to remove their ads. In the UK, a single Premier League game can contain 3,500 gambling logos. Only 7% of those are on shirt fronts. The rest are everywhere else. You can't escape it. And this brings us to perhaps the most troubling question of all. Why are we letting 18-year-olds gamble? The human brain doesn't fully develop until around age 25. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision making, impulse control, and risk assessment, is still maturing in your late teens and early 20s. Research consistently shows that young adults aged 18 to 24 are significantly more likely to develop gambling problems than older adults. They're more impulsive, more likely to chase losses, and more prone to betting beyond their means. The data is stark. Problem gambling affects 4 to 8% of young people compared to just 1% of adults. Young adults who gamble are more likely to engage in risky behaviors like substance abuse. Studies show that individuals aged 18 to 20 are particularly vulnerable to poor decision making when gambling. They lack the emotional regulation and logic that comes from a fully developed brain. Public health authorities have noted that children introduced to even harmless betting by age 12 are 4 times more likely to develop a gambling problem later in life. The American gaming industry itself knows this. Nevada, home of Las Vegas, has consistently rejected proposals to lower the gambling age to 18. Industry representatives understand it would be catastrophic. In many countries you can vote at 18. You can join the military at 18, but you can't drink alcohol until 21 in the US precisely because of brain development concerns. Yet somehow we've decided 18 is fine for an activity that has the highest self-exit rate of any addiction or disorder. Does that make any sense? The gambling industry targets this vulnerability deliberately. They know that if they can hook someone young, they've potentially got a customer for life, or at least until that person loses everything. Now comes the difficult part, because whilst the Premier League and gambling companies are celebrating record deals, there's another side to the story, a darker side, and it's one that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. Gambling disorder affects approximately 5.5% of women and 11.9% of men globally to some degree. That might not sound like much, but when you consider the global population, we're talking about hundreds of millions of people experiencing harm from gambling. And harm takes many forms: financial ruin, relationship breakdown, family violence, mental illness, job loss, homelessness. The normalization of gambling through sports sponsorship doesn't just affect individuals, it affects entire families and communities. Research has consistently shown that exposure to gambling promotions during televised sport encourages gambling intentions. A 2013 study found that attitudes to gambling and gambling intention were positively associated with a response to gambling sponsorship. In plain English, the more gambling advertising you see in sport, the more likely you are to gamble. And this effect is particularly concerning for young people and children. 3/4 of football fans report being concerned about the prevalence of gambling advertising in football. A survey found that gambling advertising was significantly more likely to influence those already experiencing gambling harm to spend additional money and time gambling. It's a vicious cycle. But there's something even more serious we need to discuss, something that often gets swept under the rug. Gambling disorder has the highest self-exit rate of any addiction disorder. Let that sink in. Roughly 1 in 5 pathological gamblers attempt self-exit. That's a higher rate than alcohol addiction, higher than drug addiction. Studies from the United States found that those with a gambling disorder were 6 times more likely to have self-exit thoughts, 15 times more likely to make a self-exit attempt. A Swedish study found that individuals diagnosed with gambling disorder were 15 times more likely to die by self-exit than the general population. In Victoria, Australia, at least 4.2% of all self-exit were found to be gambling related. In England, up to 500 self-exits are linked to betting every year. For every person who gambles at high risk levels, an average of 6 other people are affected. 6 people who haven't placed a bet, but whose lives are upended by someone else's addiction. Partners, children, parents, friends, colleagues. The gambling industry likes to talk about responsible gambling. They put out helpline numbers and self-exclusion tools. But the World Health Organization has been clear. Industry self-regulation largely doesn't work. Voluntary measures have poor uptake. They're designed to protect the industry's profit, not vulnerable people. The WHO has called for mandatory systems involving limits on time and money spent gambling. They've said that global public health action is needed to counter the commercial gambling industry. And yet, in the world's most watched football league, 55% of teams are sponsored by these same companies. Sites like 1xBet operate with impunity. Age verification is a joke, and we're targeting 18-year-olds with developing brains. So, what happens now? Well, there is some good news. In April 2023, Premier League clubs voted to ban gambling sponsorships from the front of their shirts, starting from the 2026-27 season. They became the first sports league in the UK to take such an action voluntarily. Spain, Italy, and the Netherlands have already implemented similar bans. Of course, there's a catch. Gambling companies can still sponsor shirt sleeves, stadium advertising, training kits, official partnerships. The ban only covers the front of matchday shirts, and clubs are allowed to sign new gambling deals right up until the ban takes effect, which is precisely why we saw the surge to 11 clubs in the 2024-25 season. There's also a new player entering the game: cryptocurrency firms. Premier League clubs secured £130 million in crypto sponsorships for the 2024-25 season, often filling the gaps left by the gambling restrictions. The irony, of course, is that crypto trading carries many of the same risks as gambling. Different suit, same game. But there are better examples out there. In 2024, the English Football League, Premier League, the FA, the Women's Super League agreed on a new code of conduct for gambling-related agreements in football. It covers child protection, social responsibility, reinvestment, and integrity. Ireland's Gambling Regulation Act now bans gambling ads on TV, radio, and online platforms between 5:30 AM and 9 PM. Ontario, Canada prohibits the use of athletes and influencers in sports betting advertisements. The question is, what can we do as fans, as viewers, as citizens? First, we can acknowledge the problem. Gambling sponsorship in sport isn't just a neutral business arrangement. It has real consequences. It normalizes gambling for children. It makes it harder for recovering adults to escape triggers. It puts profit ahead of public health. Second, we can demand better enforcement. Sites like 1xBet should not be allowed to operate freely. Age verification must actually work, and platforms like FlashScore need to be held accountable for bombarding young users with gambling content. Third, we need to have an honest conversation about age limits. If the science shows that 18-year-olds are not equipped to handle gambling responsibility, perhaps we should listen to that science. Some jurisdictions are already moving toward 21 as the minimum age. That's a step in the right direction. Fourth, if you or someone you know is struggling with gambling, please seek help. There are resources available. In the UK, GamCare runs a helpline. The National Gambling Helpline operates 24/7. Gambling Anonymous offers peer support. Recovery is possible, but only if people feel able to reach out. And finally, we can support organizations pushing for change. Groups like the Big Step campaign, led by people harmed by gambling and the families of those who've died, are calling for an end to all gambling advertising and sponsorships in football. These voices matter. Football existed long before gambling companies plastered their logos across it, and it will exist long after this era ends. The question is, how much damage will be done in the meantime? In 2002, when Fulham signed the first deal with Betfair, nobody could have predicted where we'd end up. 1,000% growth in 22 years. Half the Premier League gambling companies. Billions of viewers exposed to this advertising every single week. We've created a world where legitimate gambling operators plaster their logos across football shirts, and illegal operators like 1xBet sponsor some of the world's biggest clubs whilst live streaming matches involving children. A world where age verification is performative theatre, where sites designed for checking football scores are revenue generators for gambling companies, where we market addictive products to people whose brains aren't fully developed. But change is possible. Regulation is coming, even if it's slower than we'd like. Communities are speaking up, awareness is growing, the tide can turn. Because at its heart, football is still the beautiful game. It's still about skill, passion, and community and joy. It doesn't need gambling companies to survive. It never did. And it certainly doesn't need 18-year-olds being targeted with an addiction that kills more than any other. The question is, will we demand better? Or will we let the next generation inherit a sport where gambling is so deeply embedded they can't imagine it any other way?